Welcome back. We'll now have the Education and Pupil Services Committee in-person and virtual meeting for March 22nd. The meeting of the Education and Pupil Services Committee will please come to order. The district posted this evening's agenda to board docs at least 24 hours prior to the commencement of this meeting. Is there a motion to approve that previously posted agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. The agenda has been moved and seconded. Are there any amendments to offer?
There are no amendments.
Thank you. The agenda has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please signify by saying I oppose and state your name for the record. Those abstaining, please signify by saying I abstain and state your name for the record. The motion carried. I will now turn over the Education and Pupil Services Committee agenda to co-chair, Director Neal.
Thank you, President Brown. Ms. Kelly, could you please begin with an overview of the agenda items this evening?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Tonight on the Education and Pupil Services Committee meeting, we have 3 agenda items. The first item is an adoption of a new textbook for the Advanced Placement Literature and Composition course at the high school that will require board action. The second item is an enrollment update. That is an informational item. And the third item is an informational item for the Pennsylvania System of School Assessments, or the PSSAs, which is an annual update. Can I proceed to the first agenda item?
Yes, please proceed with agenda item number 1, the adoption of textbooks of advanced placement literature and composition.
Okay. So I'm going to turn over the presentation to Mrs. Kathy Kenya, who will be presenting recommending the adoption of a new textbook for the advanced placement course.
Good evening, everyone. The high school English department approached me about the possibility of obtaining a new literature and composition book for the AP course due to the AP, the College Board, realigning the test in 2019. The current books that they were using had a publication date of 2012. After receiving permission from Ms. Kelly, we formed a committee and did a search of current publications, which included the Bedford Company, which is what the book was, the publisher of the book we already had in hand, and we also looked at a company named Norton. After doing a comparison, a cost analysis, and a committee discussion, we decided that we were going to recommend and ask your permission to purchase the literature and composition book published by Bedford. The committee consisted of teachers at the high school, 4 teachers and myself. 2 of the teachers have taught this course regularly over the past several years. Highlights of the textbook: it is completely aligned to the 2019 College Board redesign. There's new tips and strategies, scaffolded skills, diverse authors, complete texts that span from 1600 to the present, and the online portion of the program offers not only an online textbook, but it offers adaptive quizzes to the students with immediate feedback. So if they take a quiz, they get a question wrong, it gives them the feedback on the answer, as well as reference in the text where to find more information. In addition to that, the teachers are able to make their own quizzes or use the publisher quizzes. We would only need a class set of 30 textbooks and 36-year digital license for the cost of $4,168. That should cover us. We would love to grow the AP program to 2 classes, but right now it just doesn't seem so feasible. A lot of our AP students are opting for dual enrollment, and that's kind of keeping our numbers level. We had a little dip because of COVID, but at this point, we've been at a class of 30 for the last several years. I'd also like to point out that districts in our neighborhood that are using this textbook include Marple Newtown, the School District of Philadelphia, Great Valley, Central Bucks, Quakertown, and Perkiomen Valley. Yes, does anyone have any questions?
I guess I'm just curious. So I took the AP Literature and Composition test, a few years ago, and and when I was in school, we didn't have a textbook for the course. You just had the books that you read, and I'm just curious if this is a long-standing thing and that my district just didn't have, or if it's a somewhat newer sort of evolution of the course.
I know we've had it since at least 2012. Maybe Ms. Kelly could go back further than that.
I wasn't in the department, but yes, phone a friend.
So my question was going to be the same question as yours, because historically, we'll go back a little bit and talk. So I heard, at least I felt like I heard an audible gasp when I heard the book is from 2012. When you're talking about literature, it's not like the literature that we're reviewing is being rewritten every year. Someone's not going to rewrite To Kill a Mockingbird, or although I guess they could rewrite Shakespeare because it's not copywritten. But the reality is a lot of those books, to your point, were novels or literature that you were reading. So I think that there's a supplement to the short stories, along with the additional novels, the poems, the short style. So I think they're updating the anthology of short stories in the collection of works to complement and augment the novels and literature that they're reading. So it's like your collegiate English courses where you had an anthology of collected works to complement short stories as well as the novels that are there. Because when I heard that audible gasp, my question was going to be, well, what has changed other than are they covering different text for the AP exams, covering different content, or is it that they are selecting different literature from that period of time in short stories and poetry versus the novels? A lot of the AP exams were covering specific great historical novels, and they were reading those instead of a collected anthology. So it sounds like that's the shift.
You're entirely right. They've added a very diverse array of poetry, short stories, to bring things up to the times.
Any other board members? All right. Seeing none, Ms. Kenya, thank you for the presentation. Ms. Kelly, would you like to proceed to agenda item number 2, enrollment update?
Absolutely. So coming up is Mr. Marshallak and Dr. Manfrey, and they're going to be doing a presentation on the enrollment trends in the school district, which is an informational item for tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. So tonight, we have a very brief enrollment update to share with the board and the public. We realize we're going through a much more, robust process with our facility study and a much more in-depth, enrollment study coming up the next, couple of years. We felt it was important. Dr. Manfrey and I and Mr. Lambert, who couldn't be here tonight, he's in Hershey right now at a presentation. Hopefully he is watching. Should be out enjoying Hershey Park right now, but he's watching our presentation. But nevertheless, he did a lot of work with this with Dr. Manfrey and myself to show a very brief update of where we are, in particular, 2 student service areas in special education and English learners. So we'll go through the agenda. To start, we're going to highlight, to start off, our English learners and the increase you'll see in the 1-year projection and historical data going back and the increase we've seen over the past couple of years. Then we'll transition to special education, in particular, our autistic support and life skills support programs. Again, historical data and then 1-year projections. And then we'll look at total student projection or population for the next 5 years. And we're going to highlight how the COVID pandemic is likely going to impact our 5-year projection. We'll go through that in more detail with that slide. So I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Manfrey for the English learners.
Thank you, Mr. Marshallak. I'm just going to go quickly on this slide and go to the next slide. But while we're looking at the next slide, we'll stay on this slide while I define English learners. But once I get past the definition of what makes an English learner, we'll move on to the next slide, which is basically a data chart that will highlight all the numbers that Mr. Marshallak was referring to earlier. I thought it was important for the board and the community to be reminded what makes an English learner an English learner. So we talk about English learners in the Upper Darby School District quite a bit. And we talk about the amount of work that goes into realizing some of the mandates that the state and the federal government place upon us. And once upon a time, when I was a young central administrator in 2014, English learners were identified simply through an assessment. Things have changed since 2014 quite a bit. Now, school districts are required to provide new registrants an opportunity to complete what's called a home language survey. The home language survey identifies students whose families speak a different language at home. Even though the student themselves may speak English, if a different language is spoken at home, we then go into what's called a family interview, where an English learner teacher, again, talking about some of the additional responsibilities that teachers have now versus what they used to have, an English language teacher will interview the family to talk to them about what language is predominantly spoken at home and how fluent the student may be in English and in that second language. Based on that interview, that screening interview, we would then provide them with what's called the WIDA screener and to determine whether or not that student qualifies for English language services. And so there's a couple different categories of English learners. There's 0-1, if you're a PIMS person, Pennsylvania Information Management System person, like Tim Lambert. There's a 0-1 through 0-6. Our 0-1s and our 0-6s are our English learners. What's the difference between a 0-1 and a 0-6? A 0-6 is what's referred to as a life student, which we're great with acronyms in education. Limited or interrupted formal education. This is a relatively new category that English learners can fall into. So you're either a 0-1, which you're an English learner because of the WIDA screener and the family interview, but you do not have limited interrupted formal education. And so when I'm talking about these numbers as we go through this presentation today, I'm going to be referring to the 0-1s and the 0-6s, those English learners and those limited or interrupted formal education students who are also English learners. 0-2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s are a different qualification that you should know about. Those are students who have tested out of the English learner program but are monitored for each of those 4 years. So you go from a 0-2 to a 0-3 to a 0-4 to a 0-5, and then eventually you are no longer classified as an English learner at all. But I do want to remind you the numbers that I'm going to be referring to are 0-1s and 0-6s. Please remember that our English as a secondary language teachers have additional responsibilities that we're not even referring to in this presentation, and that is to monitor the progress of those students who have tested out of the English learner program. I will also talk about our total numbers of English learners now compared to previous years. I'm going to give you a one-year projection, and then I'm just going to give a brief analysis. I'll do all this as we move forward to the next slide. So on this slide, you'll see in 2008-2009, there were 732 English learners district-wide total. Today, we are at 1,576 English learners district-wide. This chart gives you the years from 2008-2009 to the projection year 2022-2023. That's the one-year projection that we were speaking of. You can see that the one-year projection has the students going from 1,438 this year to 1,576 next year. I do want to point out that this one-year projection, did not include recent turmoil that is occurring in Europe, of course, with the war in Ukraine that Dr. McGarry was talking about earlier. Listen, to be perfectly honest with you, when you do student enrollment projections in this category, at least in Upper Darby, it's extremely difficult to predict because it is so unstable. Oftentimes, we have our English learner population leaving in January, and then, you know, as a part of the registration process, they have to disenroll from Upper Darby School District and then re-enroll. And so at any given time, this number can change from one month to the next, which is why under Dr. McGarry's leadership and my leadership early on, every Friday, we send a list, a Cognos, it's called a Cognos report, of the number of students and their names. And we ask the teachers to double check that the Cognos report and eSchool is accurate and that those names are recognizable, and we do that every Friday. So it's not a stable population by any stretch of the imagination. And Dr. McGarry's prediction, he likes to make predictions, of 2,000 students may very well come true based upon the turmoil that Europe is experiencing currently. But through Tim's analysis, based on a 14-year trend, we're projecting 1,576 English learners. I would also like to hit the pause button for a moment and point out that these numbers are based on October 1st numbers. And the reason for that is that's when the Pennsylvania Information Management System numbers are due to the state. So we're giving you October 1st numbers for each of these years. As far as analyzing these numbers, I'd like to point out a couple of things that are interesting to me and I think interesting to Tim as we went through this data collection. In 10 out of the 14 years, we see increases in our English learner population. From 2009-10 school year to the 2010-11 school year, we saw a decrease. 2011 to 2011, 2012 to 2012, 2013, we saw a decrease. 2015, 2016 to 2016, 2017, a decrease. 2019, 2020 to 2020, 2021, a decrease, a significant decrease, more significant than the previous decrease years that I spoke about, and we attribute that to the pandemic. The decreases in those 4 years was very small and was made up in other years tenfold. And to highlight that, for the 10 years from 2012-2013 school year to 21-22 school year, we have seen an increase of 208%, 208% increase. 687 English learners to 1,438 English learners. And again, these numbers are as of October 1st. Just to highlight a few years where we saw significant increases, 2016, 2017, we saw an increase of 135 English learners. 2018, 2019, we saw an increase of 183 English learners. And 2020, 2021, we saw an increase of 196 English learners. And again, I'd like to point out that we believe that that decrease in 2019, 2020 was pandemic related and it was pandemic interrupted. And so with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Mr. Marshallak with special education projections.
Thank you, Dr. Manfrey. So I first want to highlight, again, we're going to focus on our two specialized programs in autistic support and life skill support, in particular at the elementary level. So currently, Primus Elementary School and Westbrook Park Elementary School house our autistic support programs in grades K through 5. Hillcrest Elementary School is what houses our life skills support program, grades K through 5. So keep that in mind as we go through our projections for elementary. So when we talk about specialized support, so I want to make sure everyone is clear and understands the difference between life skills support and autistic support. Life skills support is more of a high focus on daily living skills, academics, and also other areas of functional living that students need to know and to have a skill set when they leave elementary school. In contrast, autistic support, although it also focuses on academic support, does have much more of a higher focus on communication skills, language development, and also social skills. So those areas are more of a high level of focus in that program in particular. Okay, when we talk about supplemental support, you hear these terms a lot in special education: itinerant support, supplemental, and full-time support. So let's give you an idea. Students who are seen by a special ed professional less than 20% of the day are considered itinerant level of support. That's the least amount of special ed support you get during the school day. And that's calculated with the IEP team in terms of what the needs are of the student and how much support the student may need. and who provides that support. The supplemental level, well, let me back up, the full-time level is above 80% or above support by a special professional. We don't have any full-time support in our district schools. We do refer students to our outside placements for that reason. And the reason for that is not just because of the percentage of the day students would be with that special ed teacher, but because oftentimes students who need that level of support need a higher level of care and a different level of support that we can offer in our school district buildings. So we're going to focus on the supplemental level, which is between, as you can, with the math, between 21% of the day and 79% of the day, or percentage-wise, seen by special ed professionals. Keep that in mind. There's that wide range of students who are seen by a learning support teacher or a life skills teacher or an emotional support teacher, et cetera. That's what we call the supplemental level support, and that's what goes on their notice of educational recommended placement. All right? So as we go through this, a big factor on our K-5 programming is early intervention. And we've seen over the past couple of years a significant decrease, in particular with students with autism coming in from early intervention and being placed into our supplemental program at Primus Elementary School. And I'll go through those numbers and you'll see them in the next slide. We have seen an overall increase of our special ed population in its totality by about 100 students per year. Now, keeping that in mind, we also have seen a reduction in the students that we do place outside of our school district who need full-time support as a result of the work of defining our programming, finding out what profiles of students can fit into our school district programs, but also keeping in mind that there is a requirement for the least restrictive environment. We want to try to meet the needs of our students as much as we possibly can within our school district building before we refer them to a full-time support. Keep them in their home buildings, in their home district. And the team that I have with our supervisors have done an excellent job of really going through and defining the frameworks for each one of those programs. So it's very clear and very, very well defined for the teachers and for the principals and for the parents to know what program's more appropriate for their student who needs specialized support. Projections for kindergarten. So I mentioned early intervention. That's the key piece for students coming into our school district. Just give you an idea what that looks like. So as a school district, we cannot know the names of those students until they enroll with us coming out of early intervention. So what happens is the Delaware County Intermediate Unit, who runs the early intervention programs for the county school districts, they provide us what's called a no-name report. And on that report, we know the age of the student, the classification or disability classification, and the cost of that student for early intervention. So we take that information as going far back as September and October, and we kind of try to project what students might be coming to us and what students might be going to our special programs, to then project out for budget purposes how much staff we'll need, how much support we'll need in those programs. Now, come January, February, and March is when we have what's called transition meetings. And that's when the families meet with our team, our supervisors, and our secretarial support, and talk about what programs we have to offer here. And then they have the option of enrolling with our school district or thinking about it. And at that time, we now know who the students are. And we can have a much more, better idea of what students might be coming into our programs. So it's a lot of guessing up until right about this time of the school year. And even when we have those numbers put into place, we think we know who's coming to our schools. Parents might decide to stay another year in early intervention. Or they may move. Or other students from other areas might move in, from Philadelphia in particular, who had early intervention that we didn't even know about. And they enroll with us come September and kind of blindside us with the supports that they need coming into our district. So it's a very difficult system to navigate for any district, but for someone as large as us, where we see upwards of 200 kids per year coming in for early intervention, it's difficult. And many of those children do need evaluations coming into our district as well, whether it's done in the summer or this time of the school year, or it's done in the fall of next school year. That has to happen for many of our children. And as Dr. Manfrey mentioned, the October 1 is the date that we use for capturing student enrollment. There's another date for special education students, which is December 1. It's called the child count date. And that's what helps calculate our funding stream from the federal government for how much money we get through the IDEA, support federal supports here in the district. Now, again, that fluctuates too, because many of our students who might not have a school age diagnosis, meaning they might have a developmental delay coming in from early intervention, which that does not count once they become school age in kindergarten. So we have to evaluate those students before the IEP is created and have an active IEP by December 1. So our numbers come December 1 and vice versa, October 1 might not be as reflective as they are right now later on in the school year. So that's kind of giving you an idea how complex it is with trying to navigate enrollment of special ed students coming in from early intervention. So, service delivery. So as a result of this, and I'll show you in our next screen, in fact, I'll talk about that as we go through the next slide, Ms. Kelly. You can see in particular, our low incidence or autistic support and life skill support program. If you look at the far left-hand column, going back for maybe the past 4 years, those are our kindergarten enrollment coming in. And those are the number of children who we have seen, and we're going to project to see coming in next school year who need that level of support. And as you can see, going back from the very beginning of this graph, it's almost doubled or tripled in some years. And keeping in mind, caseload requirements under Pennsylvania state law, Chapter 14, you're only allowed to have 8 students on your caseload if you have a supplemental autistic support caseload. So you can see that when we are getting 8 kids for a number of period of years, it's one teacher over the past couple of years, and it's kind of like expected. Then we see 15 kids, 20 kids, 21 kids, 22 kids last school year were just at Primus who enroll with us in that program. Now, what's interesting is that this projection for next school year is what we know as of right now. That could be cut in half or could even increase by more, depending upon who enrolls with us and who we find out about through this early intervention process. So right now, this is our best estimate of what we're going to see coming into our school year. And as a result of this, it's going to require us to shift some classroom space from Primus and Westbrook Park to Stonehurst Hills Elementary School. And we're having those conversations now with our parents in those areas. At Primus, Mr. Rogers, Mr. Comfort are having conversations. My team's working with Ms. Wallace at Stonehurst Hills, making sure the classrooms are up and running, the staff is trained, and she's trained to have this program, or part of that program, at Stonehurst Hills Elementary School for the time being, until we have, again, a larger conversation about facilities and what is the best direction for our district to move in the next number of years. But again, we feel pretty confident, and I'll give Mr. Rogers a lot of credit too, and Mr. Fitty. I've asked him to really and his teaching staff at Primus to really kind of tough it out for the past couple of years and make it work, because we didn't know what the next year would bring. But now we feel pretty confident over 3 or 4 years of student data coming in that this trend's not going to stop in this program. And as students with autism enrolling in our district, it's the third highest percentage in our school district of students with that disability is autism, behind learning disabilities and other health impairments. So it's not going to end, we don't think, anytime soon. But that's our plan for these programs in particular. Now, thankfully, life skills support has kind of been steady and has, probably a lower numbers. We don't typically have many kids coming in from early intervention who have that type of level of support. However, as time progresses and they get more exposure to curriculum and we know more about the student, many more students may qualify for life skills support as they progress through elementary school and then also into middle school. So you can see those numbers, not here, but internally, we know those numbers do kind of start out low and then creep up towards 3rd, 4th, 5th grade once we identify more students needing that type of support. So that in a nutshell is where we are with this special program or special programs for these 2 areas. So our next slide, we're going to pass it back to Dr. Manford and talk about the general enrollment for the next 5 years.
Thanks, Ed. But before we do that, I do want to go rewind a little bit and talk a little bit about the English learner programming here in Upper Darby School District, which I neglected to do. And similar to the special education program, we provide our English learners with as an individual program as we possibly can based upon data such as access testing, curriculum-based assessments, and local standardized data such as MAP testing. We also have, at our middle school level, a newcomer program specifically related to English language arts and math, and they are taught by general education teachers in science and social studies in their electives. And our Our elementary level, and of course, the newcomer program here at Upper Darby High School was started by a legend who's retired, Dr. Taddy, who was here in Upper Darby School District for close to 50 years. I believe it was 48 years. Dr. Taddy started a program here that's still running and still working. And our elementary school, and by the way, thanks to the board for our brand-new English learner program, both at the middle school level and the secondary level, and we're seeing great success with that. And at the elementary level, we use the English language arts program that we have. There's a part of that program dedicated to English learners. We believe, based upon research that's been provided by the IU and the state, in full immersion. And what full immersion means is that our English learners are taught in English all day long. That our students really pick up social English language very quickly. Where we struggle a little bit more is in the academic language, and our programs that we have in place that I just described is geared towards helping them pick up that academic language. And so I wanted to backtrack a little bit, and thank you for allowing me to do that. In terms of our overall student projections, you know, our historical data is interesting, I think. If we go back to 2008, 2009, there was a total of 11,721 students. And now we're at 12,310 students. And, you know, I know Ed's going to speak about this when I turn it over to him. There is a pause in the data's growth for the pandemic year. Once again, the growth was interrupted. You'll see on the next slide when we get to that data chart that the historical enrollment data from 2008, 2009 to this school year and the 5-year projection is broken down by grade and total. Thank you for moving forward. As a reminder, and I think this is probably the 5th or 6th time that we reminded you of this data is based on an October 1st PIMS snapshot. Of course, the data changes from one month to the next. And I want to make sure everybody understands that this data chart only includes students who attend Upper Darby School District schools. So, as you know, we're responsible for other students who go to approved private schools and OPSs and the like. And you'll see that there was a drop in enrollment as a result of the pandemic, as I've already stated. The largest point in our school district's history was 1920, and we were at 12,617 students. Mr. Marszalek?
I just want to pick up, you know, where Dr. Murphy left off. So I just want to give, again, Mr. Lambert, he is an expert, I'm sure, as we all know, an expert in this area with making projections for school districts, and he really does a nice job with this. And it's not just one variable he takes in consideration. And as you go back to the previous slide, if you will, Ms. Kelly, the very bottom bullet point talks about his methodology. He takes into account many different factors, not just a cohort survival method, which is measuring, you know, year to year to year of kids moving up from 1st to 2nd to 3rd to 4th grade, but also live births, transients in the population, and taking all those different factors into coming up with his projections, you know, for a 5-year or beyond that 10-year projection. So again, you know, it's his area of expertise, and we're very lucky to have him working on this project with us. And having him in our school district. But as Dr. Manfrey mentioned, the baby bust, as they call it, because of the COVID pandemic, we're going to see that effect in about 5 years, 26, 27 school year. Where if you go back to the graph, Ms. Kelly, the very, very bottom left-hand square, the red square, is that incoming kindergarten group, which is the lowest it's going to be or will be in this chart. If you notice, too, as well, the 20, 21, 21, 22 school year, those kindergarten numbers also seem to be a little bit lower than normal as well. That could be a result of many families maybe opting not to go to kindergarten because of the virtual learning or the hybrid learning and opting to stay in a daycare or a child care center for another year, or early intervention for that matter. So we had a lot of families who did opt in this district who did opt, you know, to take that up with child care facilities in the past couple of years. Now, the other variable that can play a role here is any type of, similar to the stock market, any type of, you know, wrinkle in our society, like a pandemic or like a war, for example, can impact the live birth. And we've been talking tonight a couple different times about, the potential, the ripple effects of the war in Ukraine. We haven't really seen that yet with our economy fully, I don't believe, and then what the impact's going to be on our families coming down the road. Is that going to impact live births in the next couple of years or beyond this 5-year, projection? We don't know yet. But again, all those variables do play a role in calculating enrollment for school districts. So we're hopeful. We're coming out of the pandemic and becoming more of an endemic. We're still waiting to see what's going to happen. But again, keeping our eye on these numbers and moving forward. But again, this is where we are right now, looking at 5 years ahead. And again, as I mentioned before, we'll look at in much more greater detail as part of a bigger project in the next couple of years with our facilities and a much larger enrollment projection coming up. So that's what we have for this evening. If any questions from the board, we're happy to take them tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Marshallek and Dr. Manfrey, for your informative and detailed presentation. Mr. Marshallek, on slide number 6, the special education low incident enrollment, could you explain to the public why grade 12 seems to be significantly higher than the other grades, why there's such a large increase, usually double, triple the amount?
It's a great question. So oftentimes, this levels out in grade 12 right here, but really it is reflective of grade 12, grade 13, grade 14, grade 15. Our students who we call them, for lack of a better term, are super seniors, students who opt to stay or defer graduation and stay until they're 21 or until they meet their IEP goals. They're eligible to stay until they're 21 if they choose. So those students are calculated, but not beyond that. There's also students who, over time, with enrollments and also identification of students, might happen more often throughout the grade span. But you're seeing that's largely going to be attributed to the multiple grade spans in grade 12.
It's not really a question, but a comment. And just I feel like I learned a lot in how you have to project, and it's not an exact science. It's like a guessing game, and the fact that you're able to staff the schools the way you do, especially with pre-K coming in, you have to depend on someone else's data to figure out how many staff you need and where to place them. I just marvel at your ability to get it done. So I just wanted to thank you for your job and your expertise in doing it.
Just a quick comment to make sure we acknowledge that we're the victims of our own success here, that as a homeowner in Clifton Heights, I can tell you it's very, very well known that people come to Clifton Heights because of the excellent autistic support programs at Primus and Westbrook Park. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that when I'm, knocking on doors or talking to neighbors. It's a well-known thing. People come for it. And so it's a testament to the team here really doing an incredible job and Mr. Marshallek and Mr. Rogers and everyone else. I just want to say thank you for doing that great work and getting us that reputation, even though it does obviously create some challenges for us.
Well, like I said, the team we have here in those programs, Mr. Comfort, Mr. Rogers, the special ed supervisors, they do an awesome job, and the teachers do an awesome job. The therapists, that program is, probably second to none in this area at both those elementary schools and in our middle schools and high school as well. So, but yeah, you're right. But a lot of families do move in here specifically to go to Primus for that program.
And I should say thank you to Mr. Comfort, too, so he doesn't yell at me the next time I see him.
On slide 6, could you clarify again the kindergarten numbers? You were explaining to me how you get those numbers, and I just wanted to hear it again. You're getting them from early intervention? Go ahead.
Right. So the historical numbers are what we actually saw coming in from early intervention, which we also projected, just as a side note. But the 24 students you see at the very bottom in the light blue or the royal blue, those are the numbers that we expect to see, and it's 22 students who have autism and 2 students who have multi-disabilities and intellectual disability who are expected. So it's not all students in our AS program. Now, how this works is we get what's called a no-name report from the IU.
Right.
Now we kind of know who the students are. We had our meetings already with the parents. We kind of know who might be coming. But prior to January or February, we get a report with grade age 5, autism, and has a list of students, not by name, but by price.
Okay.
And then we kind of make because we've done it for so long. We know that if a student is, if the IU is paying, for example, $30,000 for a student in a 5-hour, a day program, that student might not be coming to us. Might be going to an outside placement, for
Right,
example.
okay.
Or if the cost is $30,000, but it might be for a 2.5-hour placement during the day, that student likely will be coming to us in one of our special programs. It might not be within our general ed population with, itinerant level of support. So that's the type of guessing we have to do.
Right.
But it's kind of more of a science now because we kind of know what the telltale signs are. And we have our IU individuals who really help us, guide us through this too. So we're not going at it blind totally.
Okay.
We have a pretty supportive IU with Dr. Kane and his team, and Dr. Edelberg, who they kind of help us develop, what we can probably expect to see. But our team, like I said, my supervisors, really, they've taken this and they've run with it, and they really make it a pretty exact science with the system they put in place for
Okay.
us. But it is a lot of guessing at first, and then using what we know to then make a good estimate.
Okay. I guess there's been an increase, although it could be due to our success, as mentioned by Director Haig. And I guess I'm trying to figure out if or are families getting services earlier? Are they engaging services sooner? Like for this particular area, this is a critical thing. And is that why also you're seeing increased numbers because these services have been engaged sooner and earlier, and people are doing hopefully maybe a better job of getting those services, and that helps that family, but also helps us because we have a better idea what's coming in?
I mean, there's no doubt the awareness is much more out there right now than it was, say, 10, 15 years ago
Sure.
with autism in particular. Also, the number of resources and services that have been developing over the past
Yeah.
10, 15, 20 years have become much more robust and much more specific and specialized, whereas
Yep.
it might not have been, a number of years ago.
Right,
So
right.
the options that are out there, the developmental pediatricians do offer their families, say, you might want to go call your IU and get
Right.
an evaluation. You might want to go through this process, and they're hearing about what's out there and what's available to them, and they're taking them up on which they should be. That's what it's there. That's what that EI is there for. It's there to
Yep.
help kids and catch those kids before, get the service early and often. Sometimes they might not need higher level service when they get to school age.
Right.
But,
Yes.
for many students, they might need it for a period of time. And then they gradually might reduce from a supplemental level of support down to an itinerant level of support over time.
Yep.
Or they might remain in that level of support until they're 21, and that's okay too.
Right.
But as long as we're identifying them and providing those specialized supports to get them to get to be 21 years old and then transition to adulthood is really, how this continuum of supports works from early intervention through school age.
Right. Thanks for, that's a really detailed and informative response. I really appreciate that. This is just an area, the earlier services are engaged, the better, and the more services engaged, the earlier, much better. This is not an area that is a diagnosis and then that's defined for the rest of a child's life. I mean, this area has a lot, they call it a spectrum for a reason. It's a wide area, and the earlier you engage services and the more services you engage, the better outcomes, as you guys see, as some of us see, the better outcomes that you can have. So thanks for spending the time on it.
Thank you, Mr. Fields. Mr. Marshall, do you, by any chance off the top of your head, are you aware of how many extra year early intervention students are within those numbers?
So that's a good question. So there's about 5 that are coming in from this number. So we had 5 students opt to stay for the extra year of early intervention that we are paying for. That's how I know, because we're paying for them. But there's about 5 students that we're seeing that are turning 6 that will be coming into kindergarten who will be likely going into this program.
Okay, because that would mean sort of like this year there would have been 19, next year would have been 19 if we took that 5 out, and put it this year. So it seems like it's around that 19, 22 number that we see. It's like all of a sudden you see this large increase, but I think due to the pandemic, they're opting for an extra year in early intervention. So thank you. Were there any other board members that wish to comment or make a question? Dr. McGarry?
Yeah, first, I just want to say to the members of the board and the public, what Mr. Marshallak and his team do every single day on top of this data. I know, and Greg is involved in the EL, and we have John and DeMarco now involved. It's unbelievable, the volume of work, how complicated this is. And you heard tonight numbers and demographic information on students. And then, the amount of effort that goes into summer meetings, summer evaluations at 500 hours a clip. When students do go right directly from the IU, I think it's important to explain that Mr. Marshallak and the team are still responsible as the LEA for engaging those services with those families, still going to those meetings, supporting those families, even if they don't matriculate into our schools. They are in our community. They are the responsibility of Mr. Marshallak and his team, and they do a great job. And there's so much interconnectivity that goes throughout this school district. You heard tonight about, I just really want you to wrap your head around the number of English learners, and this is just special education low incidence programs. This is not the other support services that we provide. So if you just do the numbers and you add the other special education services that Mr. Marshallak is responsible for and the EL services, we're almost at 3,000 or more. We're larger than most Delaware County school districts when we serve our special education students and our English learners. We're larger than most Delaware County school districts just providing services in that area. And when you also think about the mandates, when you think about Dr. Manfrey explaining the 0 to 6 coding, the amount of coding, the amount of documentation and paperwork and going back and forth and getting that right in a system is hours and hours of time. They become full-time jobs just tracking data, just tracking the coding of monitoring each cohort each year. So think about this data. They come in kindergarten, first grade, second grade. It's not like you could take a deep breath. You got to keep tracking it and tracking it and tracking it over a period of time. The other important part that Mr. Marshallak talked about today is space. So when you hear a caseload and then the space, we've been really trying to cut classrooms at half at Primus Elementary School. And now you're seeing this, and for EL, it's the same concern. At the high school, and the middle schools, and the elementary schools, where do those services happen? Sometimes in elementary schools, they're happening in the hallway, around a table. There's no small spaces. So part of the conversation is that some of the programming at Primus Elementary School has to shift over for the students in the neighborhood to Stonehurst Hills Elementary School, given the spacing ramifications. And that's a move that the administration will be making going into next school year. And then as you look at these numbers too, I know Board Member Neil, you asked about the enrollment trends. You see that there's a dip in the middle school, so the middle school should be okay. The unknown continues to be for the EL services and the special education services driven by what is called education specifications, which is the curriculum instruction and the space required to provide autistic support. I don't think Mr. Marshallak provided today in here, but he has it, multi-disabled students at Westbrook Park Elementary School. It's another category of students that need like around-the-clock care and nursing care in our schools that we're providing. They require certain spaces and supports that if you go back to the earlier presentations, special education teachers aren't there, EL teachers aren't there, and then add to the fact as we grow in these areas, where is our space? Where are we going to find the space for these kids to go to school? So now we're being creative. We're going to have to shift over to Stonehurst Hills Elementary School. What does that look like? What are the staffing implications? We are having conversations. I know I've talked to some board members. I've definitely talked to some home and schools. Hasn't necessarily always gone over as well as I'd like it to. But when you look at these numbers and there's changing demographics, changing information, and we're making $34 million investments, maybe $70, $80 million investments for space, we want to make sure we get it right and we're not interrupting so many lives of kids so much when space is at premium here, right? So we're going to have to talk about the kindergarten center and the enrollment and the services because of space and then staff. When you split kindergartens up, having them in one building in an AM and PM, we might not be able to reach that goal because of space. And then you're adding the staff. And if the staff isn't there, is that a smart move at that time? So what we're doing is giving you a small glimpse of how we're using money, one-time money, where is the staffing going to come from, and now the enrollment trends in specific categories related to space, and then through this facility study, what the real pressure is going to look like. As a school district, we have survived by doing short-term stopgaps that have become 25-year stopgaps because there's never been the appropriate funding to provide the right supports and services. We're at that same crossroads. We're going to try to put a middle school in. We're trying to renovate and expand the Ronamick Elementary School. We need a new elementary school. They are simply to meet the needs of the spaces required for this. It is not for the latest and greatest upgrades to STEM spaces and maker spaces. It's to meet the needs of the type of educational services that the students coming into Upper Darby School District require, that I would argue, given our size and our complicated nature, other school districts do not have to meet this same level of volume, other than maybe a Philadelphia, a larger school district, as the Upper Darby School District does. It's very complicated, complex. Ed deserves a tremendous amount of credit. The hours of time above and beyond doing discipline and registration. The registration alone, how complicated the meetings are for registration alone for these students, meeting with these families, explaining the process, making them feel comfortable. It's hours. I see Mrs. Lamar Murphy shaking her head. It's hours and hours of time that Ed Marshallak and his team do around the clock, on weekends, and throughout the summer. So compliments to Ed and the team. And then balancing a budget where he's kept the budget at a reasonable dollar amount year in and year out, trying to keep these services and these programs in the school district. Unbelievable job, but I really think also the takeaway today is space, staffing, and just how complicated this is. What does itinerant learning support mean? Supplemental learning support, full-time emotional support, the categories of other health impaired. It's a very complicated world, education, and I don't know that the general public understands when we talk about how we have to shift and move space, there are requirements and services for these students in these programs that are required federally and by the state, right? And again, when you're this complicated as we are in Upper Darby, we don't have the same supports and resources and space that other communities might have, or the luxuries. So it creates another conversation with the public that becomes controversial at times. And why are we making these decisions, and why are these space issues coming up? So we're trying to give, although it seems like a lot tonight, just the one slide on it, autistic support and life skills. If we could spend probably an hour and a half explaining those programs and what goes into that. It's a very complicated process. Dr. Manfrey, I know Mrs. DeMarco is a part of it, Ms. Kelly, Mr. Salerno was here, and Ed and your team do an awesome job, and the principals do a great job. We're going to have to expand those resources, which means Stonehurst Hills Elementary School is going to have autistic support programming in that building going into next school year. So that's a consideration as we grow these programs. Where are we going to fit them, and how do they fit?
Thank you, Dr. McGarry. Any other board members?
Mr. Neal, I'd only add that besides myself, Joanna DeMarco, Frank Salerno, we also have Eileen Caruso, who's the EL coordinator, does a great job for us as well. So it is a team effort, like Mr. Marshallak pointed out.
All right, thank you, Mr. Marshallak. Dr. Manfrey for agenda item number 2, enrollment update. Ms. Kelly, would you like to proceed with agenda item number 3, the Pennsylvania System of School Assessment?
Absolutely. So the last agenda item is an informational item on the PSSA. So each March, I come and deliver the news of state testing also, which is, of course, is another mandate that we have to navigate. At this point, the principals have all been trained to administer the assessment, which is part of the requirements. And now the requirement is to educate the public and the parents that the tests will be coming up. So in grades 3 through 8, students will take the English language arts assessment, which are 3 sections, as well as the math, which are 2 sections. The dates have been approved on our district calendar, and they will span from April 26th through April 28th for those first 3 sessions of English language arts. And then in math, May 2nd and 3rd, so the next week, the first week in May, students will continue with the math assessment. After that, grades 4 and 8 have also the science assessment to take, and that will continue on Thursday, May 5th and May 6th. The elementary does have a little break in their testing because there is an early dismissal, and we don't break the early dismissals on that first Wednesday. So it does give them a little break between that math and science assessment for the 4th grade students that do have to continue to test. All throughout there, the principals also are responsible for making up any students in grades 3 through 8 that may have missed the assessment during those testing periods. So as I continue, the general information for just parents and guardians as you prepare for the students for taking this assessments, we also cover this in the schools as reminders for students, but third grade students, this will be their first time taking a state assessment. So just a reminder for parents and guardians, electronic devices are prohibited for students taking the assessment. So there are no cell phones, there's no smartwatches, there are no iPods that students are allowed to have with them. Cell phones are collected and they have to be turned off. And smartwatches, iPods, the same thing. They cannot have them with them. Parents and guardians, if there is an issue with a cell phone or another type of electronic device, we have to reach out to PDE. We let them know what is going on, and then we follow the protocols that they tell us to follow. So it could be a school discipline that's there. It could be that the test is not deemed to be able to be scored, and students may have to retake the test or cannot use that test at all. They have to get a new booklet. Because the PA Department of Education does hold all the copyrights for the materials that are there. So we have reached out. We have a good working relationship with the state in this area, and usually what we know the rules and what we have to do. So it's usually not an issue, but there's always a few times that the cell phone goes off in the bag and in their school bags, and they didn't mean to still have them on or anything like that, but it does happen occasionally, and we deal with it when it does. But if we could just remind parents and guardians that they should not have those electronic devices with them those days. For those parents that wish to exempt their child from the assessment, there is a policy. It is Policy 107. The items and what parents have to do are listed below. So they do have to contact the school principal, and they have to set up a time to review the assessment. At that time, they have to sign a parent confidentiality agreement, which is part of the PA code. From that, they do get to review the assessment to see if it is a religious opt-out that they can proceed with, and they have to review it with district personnel beside them or the school principal. After that, written permission has to be submitted in writing to the superintendent, which then issues the acceptance to taking the test. So that is the information for the state assessment. Again, it is an annual review of the assessments. Not much has changed in years past, but we will be administering this test beginning April 26th of this year for grades 3 through 8. So are there any questions for the state test at this point?
Yeah, this is probably a risk, but I'm going to say it. We have to stop this at some point. With everything we have going on over the last couple of years with our kids, it's another example of, we try to catch our breath, and here we go again. We're going to shoehorn these kids into this testing window. They've missed some instructional time, and now we're going to go through the number of meetings with parents, reviewing tests, who's going to go, who's going to not, the pressure. When we know over the last couple of years there has been inconsistent delivery of instruction by teacher shortages, substitute teachers, and then again, you have to scratch your head and think outside of this window with all the local assessments that we've given, and we had this conversation previously with the board each year, and we have had conversations with representatives and state leaders. The idea of accountability, there are local assessments that we know if an EL student is doing well on a MAP test, we could have those conversations. But to then put them through another series of assessments and then to publicize those for competing interests, I was talking to Board Member Williams at the beginning of this conversation, like what is the point with what we're trying to do here, pitting districts and communities against each other when certain communities are certainly harder hit, and there's a serious crisis in teaching and learning happening in this country and in Title I schools and school districts serving students that are minority students or impoverished students. What do we think we're going to get other than continuing to drive down home values, market values in those communities, saying those schools are not providing great services? What is the end game by creating this competition still? So I'm all about accountability and looking at kids and where they are and improving those kids. But this process of testing kids this way is a broken system, and we keep getting similar results, yet the funding, the teacher services and supports aren't there. So if you could see tonight's presentations from the finance and operations to the education people services, there's a common theme, that there is somewhat of a crisis in education, and yet we're asking people to deliver these services with unrealistic expectations and a lack of funding. And we expect something to change as we do that. How, for the life of us, are we're going to think that our number one product, our kids and our communities, don't deserve better is a head scratcher to me. And then we think we're going to get changes without mental health support services, EL services, special education services, and then we're going to make them come in and take a test. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me.
Dr. McGarry, I'm sorry for jumping in, but it just struck a nerve with me. To highlight what you're speaking about even more, our English learners who are amongst our most vulnerable population just got finished taking a state assessment. Just finished the federal assessment, the access test, to determine whether or not they're going to continue in our English learner program. And they're assessed in listening, speaking, writing, and reading for access. And now they're going to take the PSSA, that same population. So it's frustrating. Sorry.
Not to mention the impact that it has on our staff, as they administer these tests and then get the results back, and they've worked so hard to move the needle for students. And these are snapshots of children on one day or a few days in time. They are not an overall picture of our students, and I think we do a much better job with our local assessments to be able to see how our students are really performing. It's really it's a horrible system that I remember my first entry into the district. One of our principals, who's no longer here, said something about, the goal at that time was to get to 100% proficiency. Dr. McGarry probably remembers this. And I sat there and said, statistically impossible. But anyway, our teachers, please know that we know that you're working hard every day, and these are not a reflection of what you're doing every day in the classroom with children.
This whole topic infuriates me, especially as a special education teacher, not just considering the ELL students, but considering that the children who have severe mental health issues, they are literally bouncing off the walls. They can barely sit still. They have all kinds of things going on in their head, and then we want to sit them in a chair in a quiet space and have them take this test. As a teacher and as teachers, they are already challenged with how to deal with the behavior issues and the mental health issues of children. And then you want to put the task of a challenging grade level test. So the child may be on a kindergarten level, and they're in a 5th grade, they have to take the grade level test. It causes so much mental distress on children, especially now with COVID. It makes no sense. It's so unfair to the families who have to come up there because the kids are acting out, or because the kids don't want us to go to school, or because the teachers are stressed out, and then we want to know why we have this problem. We have to stop teaching to the test. We have to stop over-testing these kids and just let these kids come to school to learn and grow and flourish. Do away with the test.
I was just going to say, it sounds like something we can advocate for, an advocacy day. It's something that we can talk about. So,
Thank you, President Brown. Thank you, Director Lamar Murphy. All right, at this time, are there any public comments?
There are no public comments at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Buford. All right, now, Ms. Kelly, would you please review the agenda items?
Yes, so item number 1 was the adoption of textbooks. Ms. Kathy Kenya presented the adoption, or the recommendation to adopt the Advanced Placement Literature and Composition textbook beginning with the 22-23 school year. That would require board action at the April committee, or at the April board meeting, excuse me.
Agenda item number 1, the adoption of textbooks, Advanced Placement Literature and Composition. It's recommended for a vote at the April 5th, 2022 regular school board meeting. Do any board members have an issue with moving this agenda item forward?
So we answer
Hearing, well, no. If you have an objection, you can make it known now. Hearing none, this item will be moved to the April 5th, 2022 regular school board meeting. Ms. Kelly, agenda item 2 and 3?
Sure. Agenda item 2 was an informational item. Mr. Marshallak and Dr. Manfrey presented the enrollment updates for special ed and EL students. This was an informational item as well. And item number 3 was the PSSA annual update or annual review of the general information for parents and guardians as we approach the state testing window. Again, that was informational.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Okay. President Brown?
Thank you. Yeah, and your mic's going out at the time. But thank you for running the meeting, Director Neal. A motion is in order for the adjournment of the Education and Pupil Services Committee meeting. All those in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you very much for your time and attention.